Okay, so this is welcome to the first seminar of 2024. We have Matija Kovacic talking about social interactions, loneliness and health of second-generation immigrants. Just another announcement before we start that GLO and the Italian Association of Development Economists will have a joint conference in Naples, 11th to 13th of September. The information is a bit already on GLO website, but we will put more once we open up for submissions, etc. So please keep checking the GLO website. Okay, with that, Matija, you're happy with people kind of asking questions as you present?
For me, it's perfect, as you prefer. During the presentation or at the end, for me, it's fine. Everything is fine.
So please, if you have any questions, unmute yourself, your microphone, as in. But otherwise, please keep it muted, except obviously Matija. And as always, this is being recorded and will be available on the website, GLO website, tomorrow or by Monday at the latest. Okay, with that, Matija, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, and good afternoon to everyone. And thank you for inviting me to this webinar. So I'm working in the European Commission at the Joint Research Center in Italy, in Ispra, which is a very small place close to Milan, with a very big research center of the European Commission. And I have been here for more than 4 years. And before joining the JRC, I was a researcher at the Foscari University of Venice. And so today I'm going to talk about loneliness and its potential effects on individuals' health. And loneliness is widely recognized as being one of the major public health issues. And it is attracting attention of researchers and policymakers recently. And the research that I'm going to present is part of a broader initiative at the European level that we have been working on in the past 2 years and something. And I will not give you the details of this project because it is not relevant for us now, but there were several activities related to loneliness in Europe. And one of these was the design of the first EU-wide survey on loneliness that gave us some very interesting insights into the prevalence of loneliness in Europe in different dimensions. However, I will show you some very shortly some descriptive statistics that emerged from our loneliness survey, just to introduce the argument, the main argument of the paper later. Now, the outline of today's presentation is the following one. So, first of all, I will give you a broad definition of the concept, which is a very delicate concept, as we will see. This definition is commonly used in the literature. And then I will tell something about why we should care about loneliness and why it represents a serious public health and economic issue, not only in Europe, but in general. Then, as I told you before, I will share with you some very simple descriptives in order to introduce the argument. And then I will start to talk about the main paper, which is about loneliness and its effect on individuals' emotional disorders and several physical health outcomes. And as you can imagine, this is a very complex relationship because we have the problem of reverse causality. We cannot be at 100% sure what influences what. Is it the loneliness that we will now define in a minute that influences health, or it is the adverse health that may boost loneliness? So in this context, we need some exogenous proxy for loneliness if we want to even to try to isolate the direct effect of loneliness on health. And this is something that we are doing in the paper that I will present, in which we propose an alternative, let's say, strategy to cope with this problem of reverse causality. And we try to estimate the direct effect of loneliness on several health outcomes. And then we compare it with the evidence, the existing evidence from the literature, which is mostly based on associations. Now, more precisely in the paper, what we do is that we explore deep historical roots of attitudes towards loneliness that are recorded in contemporary cultures. So then we use this after we isolate this very particular cultural component, we use it as an instrument for loneliness in a model for health. And these specific cultural characteristics are strictly related to the tightness of socially imposed norms and restrictions that limit individuals' behavior to choose their optimal behavioral path and decrease their level of satisfaction with the existing social relationships, which is, according to the literature, the most important psychological factor that influences the likelihood of experiencing loneliness. So this is very briefly our strategy that I will explain in detail soon. And then at the end, I will present the main results and compare these results with the existing results in the literature and show and tell something about future directions. Where should we go in this context? Okay, let's start from a very broad definition of loneliness. So, as I said, it is a very delicate concept, and it can be defined as some kind of a feeling that arises when an individual perceives that her or his social relationships are deficient, or in terms of quantity or in terms of quality. By quantity here, for instance, we mean the number of friends, the frequency of contact with friends or with close family members, or in general, how wide the social networks are. By quality, we means subjective perception of the quality of these relationships, independently of how many they are. Because the quantity, in part, and also, of course, the quality, may be a cultural matter. So from one society or from one culture to another, the optimal quantity can differ. Now, what is important to say when we talk about loneliness is that it is not only a matter of being alone or physically isolated, but rather it is some kind of a dissatisfaction with what we have. And it is a very subjective phenomenon, because we see here it is a feeling based on perceptions. And as any other subjective phenomenon, it can be influenced by a plenty of factors, starting from the common demographic or socioeconomic factors, but also these commonly shared factors like culture factors or mentality at the societal level that can, to a different extent, influence the individual's perceptions, the individual's attitudes, behaviors, choices, and so on and so forth. And it is not new in economic science. Okay, we have several nice and important contributions dealing with that. So, but it is important also to say that loneliness is not only a psychological phenomenon, it has also an economic cost. And because it represents a serious public health issue, and the existing literature, which is mostly psychological or medical, shows significant associations between loneliness and several health outcomes like depression, anxiety, suicides, or even cardiovascular diseases, diabetes, high blood cholesterol, or even cognitive or functional decline, limited mobility, and so on and so forth. And all this literature is based on correlations, not on causality. It is also an economic problem because clearly it is associated with increased healthcare expenditure, but also in the labor market. It is positively related with increased absence or loss of productivity or higher turnover, which may be due to a lower job satisfaction, and so on and so on. So it is an important economic concern, not only in the domain of health, but also in other contexts. And it does not affect only older individuals, as it is commonly believed, but it is very, very important issue also for younger people. And there are some subgroups of the population which are adversely affected by loneliness, like LGBT individuals or migrants, first and second generation migrants. Okay, I briefly mentioned at the beginning that this EU-wide survey on loneliness, that I will just show you some figures, very few, on the prevalence of loneliness in Europe. So it is, we have more or less 1,000 observations per country. It is representative. Some smaller countries has less observations, and it has been conducted in 2022, several modules. This, I will skip this. And so maybe I will say something about the measurement of loneliness, which will be useful also for later, so when I will avoid to repeat this. Loneliness in general in surveys is measured mostly in two different ways. There is a direct question on loneliness, which simply asks people, how often did you feel lonely in the past 4 weeks, 2 months, or whatever? No? And this question is a bit problematic because it explicitly mentions loneliness. And some categories may be particularly reluctant to answer this question or to reveal their actual state of soul, whether they feel lonely or not, because it mentions Yes, please. No, no question. Okay. And another measure, which is UCLA scale, which is the commonly used, the most frequently used, is based on 3 different questions, no mentioning directly loneliness, and then the answers are quantified in order to obtain the scale that ranges from 0, not lonely, to 9, very lonely. And we will use this one, which is the best one. Okay, very briefly, in Europe, loneliness is present. 13% of the European population on average declare to feel lonely most of the time. And 35% more or less declare to be lonely some of the time, which we define as slightly lonely, according to all the measures that we have, all the 3 measures. So the numbers are quite stable. The prevalence of loneliness, interestingly, decreases with age. But here I cut at 70. But if we go above 70 to 90, then it slightly increases again. And what is interesting is that younger people are particularly affected by this feeling. Even though they're more probably, they have a wider social networks. So this is the first indication that probably the quantity is not so important as quality. And young women are more likely to be lonely than young men, even though the difference is not significant. It is also true that loneliness, the prevalence decreases with income and education. This is nothing new. The literature also says that unemployed people or those who are already still in education, studying, they are more lonely than employed people, which is also something that emerges from the literature. LGBT individuals are more likely to be lonely than the rest of the population, and the same is true for first and second generation migrants compared to natives. When it comes to health, for instance, this is something that we will talk about today. Lonely individuals, the share of lonely individuals that declare to have poor overall health is around 35% compared to 12% among non-lonely individuals. And this difference is even bigger when we consider depression. So almost 50% of individuals who declare to be lonely most of the time also declare to have suffered from some depressive symptom in the reference period. This is stable over age groups, across age groups, while the overall number of these emotional disorders slightly decreases with age, but it is still significant for all age groups. And similar thing can be observed for physical health. So lonely individuals have more long-lasting health conditions and worse health, and this increases with age, which is due also to aging, which is not strange. Okay, so these are quite relevant policy insights for policymakers and for us researchers that in part confirm what we know from the literature, but several things remain open. First of all, as I said, we cannot know what is the real impact of loneliness on health if we do not solve the issue of reverse causality. And this is the main point that we will try to do now, that I will show you how we try to do in the paper that I will present. Okay, this is a paper that is co-authored with a colleague of mine from JRC, Elizabeth Casabianca. And the key starting point here is that I mentioned at the beginning, I will not repeat all, but loneliness is a very subjective phenomenon, so it is very delicate, and as any other attitude or perception, it can be influenced by many things. Okay, so here we are interested mostly in these cultural psychological factors or norms And I like this definition of culture as the collective programming of mind, no? In the sense that even though we do not realize this unconsciously, it influences to different extent our way of thinking or perceiving reality. Okay, we can agree with them, these norms, we cannot agree, but up to some point they influence our way of thinking, our behavior in general. And this can be also true for loneliness, okay, if it is considered as an attitude. So there may be some cultural factors that influence the way in which we perceive our relationships, the quality of our relationships, which is the most important factor according to the literature for loneliness in general. And here we do this. We are trying to estimate the direct effect of loneliness, solving the issue, at least trying to solve the issue of reverse causality between loneliness and health. And our strategy is mainly based on 3 pillars, let's say. First of all, as I mentioned before, we explore the historical roots of attitudes toward loneliness, which pass through a very specific cultural thread that is related to the importance of norms and restrictions governing individual behavior at the society's level, okay? But in order to separate the effect of culture from the other country-specific characteristics, we follow so-called epidemiological approach. So we consider second-generation migrants. So we compare individuals that are born in the same country, they were raised in the same country, but we explore the heterogeneity in their parental cultural backgrounds. So everything about culture in this paper refers to individuals' parents, okay? And then we use this as an instrument for the individual's self-declared loneliness. Before showing you the model and before starting to discuss deeply about the role of culture in loneliness and health, it is important to answer 2 different questions that I partially already answered. First of all, which aspect of social life matters more for loneliness? Is it the quantity or the quality? Now, the literature is saying that it is quality, okay? So individuals facing the same number of social relationships, they may have very different evaluations of these relationships. So this is the perceived quality. Now, the point here is that there are some characteristics at the society's level, some cultural characteristics that may be strictly related to the perception of quality. And these are norms and restrictions that somehow force individuals to fit into predefined behavioral standards. And this may influence significantly the perception, the level of satisfaction with their social life. This part of culture is called life control components. So the ideal thing for us would be to find a way to isolate this life control component for culture. And this is something that we try to do here. The second thing is that where to find these cultural elements, these cultural characteristics. So here we rely on the Hofstede 6-dimensional model of culture, which has been widely used in the economic literature. And among 6 different dimensions, there are 2 that are particularly interesting for us. The one is the distinction between individualism and collectivism, which is strictly related to the quantity of relationships. So individualistic societies are those that are characterized by smaller social networks. People have less good friends. The frequency of contact is lower than in collectivistic society. The prevalent type of family is nuclear, so smaller family. Individuals are more independent in general. And these are typically societies from the Northern Europe, let's say. Collectivistic society, on the other side, are those characterized by big social networks, a lot of people around, big extended family, communitarian families, and so on and so forth. The second category is strictly related to the quality of social life, and it is restraint and indulgence, and it is really reflects the role of norms and restrictions. And the core component of restraint is exactly the life control that we would like to extrapolate somehow. Restrained societies are those in which social norms and prohibitions strongly govern individuals' behavior. The individuals, on average, have lower perceived freedom to live as they wish. There is a stronger pressure to fit into predefined standards, and so on and so forth. So the most of this restraint, measured on a scale between 0 to 100 at the country level, is life control. There is a small residual component which is related to leisure in general. We are not interested. We should separate these two things and consider, let's say, the cleanest possible index of restraint. And this is something that we do by following a historical approach. But before showing you how we do this, I will show you some figures just in order to strengthen a bit the main channels linking norms to freedom, to satisfaction, and then loneliness. So what we know from the literature is that higher restraint is related to stronger norms, and which, as a result, has a restricted freedom. What should we check now is whether the restricted freedom brings to a lower satisfaction with social life or happiness in general. And then we should also show that there is a positive correlation between lower satisfaction and higher restraint and probability of experiencing loneliness. Now, very briefly here, I use the data from the Gallup World Poll Survey at the individual level. So we have really many observations from really many countries in the world, and of course, all Europe. And so the dots that you see here are the marginal effects of low freedom to live the life as individuals want, which is this one, so restricted freedom here. And we also control for leisure, okay? Leisure is measured by the fact that an individual works more than 50 hours per week, okay? So what we see here, we have three different outcomes. The first one is feeling unhappy. The second was in an index that gives us the level of dissatisfaction with life in general. And the last one is the level of dissatisfaction with social aspects of life. So we can see that the restricted freedom significantly correlates, is significantly related to unhappiness, to lower satisfaction with life in general, and to lower social life satisfaction. So the direction is correct. The second thing is that the question is that higher restraint that we want to use related to dissatisfaction? It seems that it is. There is a positive correlation. So these figures are at the country level. On x-axis, on the left-hand side panel, we have restraint index, and on the y-axis, we have the level of dissatisfaction at the country level. So here we can see that restraint and dissatisfaction is positively correlated, and the same is true for loneliness on the right-hand side panel, where on the y-axis we have the average loneliness experienced by the population in each country as measured by the UCLA scale, which is from 3 to 9. Okay, so these correlations are positive. So there is something in this mechanism that is correct. But if we turn to individualism and collectivism, which is the cultural indicator that has been commonly used in the literature on loneliness, because there was the people years ago believed that more people you have around, wider is your social network, lower should be the probability of experiencing loneliness. But when it comes to loneliness, as I said at the beginning, this is not true. It is the opposite. So if we do the same correlations here, we see that individualism and dissatisfaction with social lives are not correlated at all. There is some but negative correlation between individualism and loneliness, but these points are much more dispersed than in the previous case here with the restraint. Okay, now, if we want to continue with this story, the next question is, how can we isolate this life control component from restraint, which is which would be the best thing. Now, according to the literature, in general, Observed differences in the restrictiveness of the existing norms and prohibitions in the contemporary cultures may be rooted in the pre-industrial intensity of agricultural production. This means that highly intensive agricultural systems, they were characterized by very hard work, by strict rules and discipline, and planning was really important. This is something that Galor and Ozak were used in their paper on the historical origins of individuals' long-term orientation, okay? Now, the point is that if this is true, then higher exposure of these factors in the pre-industrial period may have contributed to the emergence and persistence of threats that are related to stricter norms and prohibitions, and that these threats has been transmitted from one generation to another. And if this is true, we should observe them in contemporary culture, because at least to some extent they should be recorded in contemporary cultures. Okay, so this is one of our main assumptions here. So we start from here. And for agricultural production in the pre-industrial period, we rely on Galor's and Ozak paper, their proxies for agricultural productivity or agricultural potential. And we consider two main variables. The first one is the pre-industrial crop yield potential and its change in the post period from 16th century on. And we also control for a crop growth cycle and for a full set of geographic factors. And of course, how we are going to use all this information. So we assume that the life control component, which reflects the role of norms and prohibitions, which is also the core component of restraint, can be proxied, let's say, with these historical facts, with these historical factors. So what we are going to do is we will estimate a model at the country level, considering all the countries that we can, because here we are talking about the origin of individuals. So we will have more than 80 countries as parental countries of origin. We will regress the contemporary restraint on all these factors, and we will take the predicted values. And these predicted values should reflect the life control component, which we will check also whether it is related to the rule of norms, the opinions about the rules, the norms, and the proper behavior, and so on and so forth, leaving out the residual component. So this is the idea. I will show you in a minute the model. As for the data, so the individual level data in this paper are mainly taken from SHARE, which is the survey of health, aging, and retirement in Europe. This is the data set that is very good for this kind of analysis because it contains really many health indicators and a very rich set of individual level controls. It considers only individuals aged 50 or older, okay? However, we performed a robustness check on some model specifications using also the European Social Survey, where we can consider also younger individuals. However, European Social Survey does not contain a UCLA question on loneliness, but only the direct one, which is a problem. However, the results are quite robust. And in the European Social Survey, we have really less health outcomes. Loneliness is measured by the UCLA scale, as we saw at the beginning. So 3 questions, the minimum score is 3, the maximum score is 9, which is very lonely, and it is self-declared. So of course, the individual level. Among the explanatory variables and controls, we will consider everything that we can control for, which is meaningful based on the literature. So demographic factors, socioeconomic factors, whether an individual lives alone. We have some parental information, adverse childhood conditions, financial situation during childhood, a number of books at home, whether the individuals were alone in childhood, their health status in childhood. And then we have a battery of questions on a current involvement in social activities, voluntary activities, unhealthy behaviors, and so on and so forth. So we perform really many sensitivity checks and consider all these additional variables to see whether the main results are stable. The cultural index of interest is restrained, as we said, and for health outcomes.
Matija, sorry,
Yes.
I'm to interrupt. I'm just trying to still kind of understand this. There's only one, in a way, side of the aspect you are looking at, in the sense that it's a cultural kind of background and stuff like that. But it's these questions that you ask in the previous slide on, or the survey asked on loneliness, or the slide.
Yes.
I mean, it's related to how I am perceived, or the individual is kind of received, so to speak, by the society that they live in. So my feeling of loneliness or lack of companionship and stuff like that is also linked strongly to how I am received by the natives, so to speak. And,
So yeah.
that is going to be an important factor in terms of, people from different regions are going to be affected differently. And it's not necessarily cultural aspect of their own kind of background.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yes, I completely agree, because these kind of questions, which is unfortunately the only one together with the direct question, we test the robustness, so it is quite in line. Also with the other type of question. Yes, they seem sometimes that this is something that how the society treats me. Okay, because they left me out, they isolate me from others. For them, I lack some companionship. This is true, but as it is common in this kind of studies, we try to use it as a proxy for this type of attitude. So we do not have, except the direct question, we directly ask you, did you feel lonely or not, independently of the reason? This is the only thing, unfortunately, that we can use for to proxy this type of attitude, yeah, let's say. But you are perfectly right. Yeah. So then, and of course, that it can differ from one region to another, from one country to macro. Yes, we try to control for this somehow. So we do the best that we can. But I agree with you that this can be a problem, of course, a problem. Something that should be taken into account, of course, while explaining the results. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, one way could be that if there is a bigger diaspora, so you have more co-ethnics in a country, then it might be that you feel less lonely because you have, people that you can rely on. Whereas if you have fewer, so it might be that that is another way of testing, just to make sort of bigger diaspora.
Yes, yes, and this is particularly true, for instance, for first-generation migrants that can heavily rely on the existence of their own communities in the territory where they arrive, in the host countries, right? For second-generation migrants, of course, a bit less, no? Yes, but it still can be a problem. However, we control for, there is a question that say, do you rely heavily on your ethnic group as a minority group in the population? So we control for this, whether yes or no. So we also control for the size of the social network and all these elements in order to alleviate a bit of this problem, which is completely correct. Yes.
Do you have kind of ethnic concentration data in terms of where the
No,
region?
no. We don't have this. You mean at the regional level?
Like at the
Because
municipal, if you're
at the,
living in an area with more co-ethnics or more immigrants.
that would be hard with the shared data at the municipality level, at the NUTS2 eventually, but now it's bigger NUTS2, so it can be much more heterogeneous. Yeah, but it would be very useful to control also for this. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Health outcomes, I think. Okay, yes. So we consider the main emotional disorders and physical health outcomes that are available in the shared data. So for the emotional disorders, which is used as an indicator of mental health, we use the EUROD scale. which is composed by 12 different items, which you can see here. So depression, pessimism, suicide, lack of appetite, fatigue, and so on and so forth. For physical health, we consider the number of mobility and motor limitations, number of chronic diseases, body mass index, and the individual's self-assessed health. And then we also estimate the model using a single physical health outcomes, like diabetes, high blood pressure, ulcer, cholesterol, stroke, everything that is commonly considered by the literature. And we also run some regressions on the drug consumption for sleeping problems, anxiety, cholesterol, diabetes, and so on and so forth. So these are the main outcomes that we usually find in the literature, and we estimate the effect of loneliness on this. As we said before, epidemiological approach that allows us to separate the effect of cultural backgrounds from the country-specific institutional and economic and other factors. And we explore the individual's parental origin, and the indicator will be attached to individual's parents then, okay? Under the assumption, of course, all this story is okay, if these beliefs and values are vertically transmitted from parents to kids, okay, from one generation to another. This is a very important assumption. So these are the main hypotheses, okay? First, higher historical intensities of agricultural production that then trigger the imposition of discipline and restrictions. This should translate into a higher degree of restraint in contemporary environments. So this is the first thing to check. And this will be at the country level, of course. The second hypothesis is that net of the other factors, individuals with cultural backgrounds characterized by stricter norms and prohibitions, so stronger life control dimension, should be on average more likely to declare to be lonely, independent of where they live, all the factors possible that we can consider and control for. And the third hypothesis is that, according to the literature, loneliness should negatively affect almost everything. Because if we observe the existing literature, loneliness is negatively correlated with almost all health outcomes, which may be due to the reverse causality and all the problems that we have in the literature. So we should check that, okay? So this is a very simple model. So the first hypothesis, as at the country level, we regress contemporary level of restraints on the full set of historical and agricultural and climatic factors. And from this regression, we take for each country the predicted value. And this will become our life control component. Then, for each individuals, we will attach this life control component to their parents, and then we will estimate a two-stage model in which loneliness is instrumented with life control, and then we will see what is the effect of loneliness on health, on all the health outcomes that I mentioned before. Of course, here we should be a bit careful because the life control component that derives from the first equation comes from different distribution than restraint. So the standard errors in the two-stage estimation will be bootstrapped and clustered at the country of origin and the country of residence level in order to overcome this potential problem. Okay, these are the results. I just put it in a figure without tables. It's easier to read. These are the results from the first equation, in which we see the effects of a one standard deviation increase in the agricultural factors on restraint today in contemporary societies, okay? We have, for each variable, we see 3 different dots because there are 3 models. The first one is the baseline one. In the second one, we add population density and historical population density. And in the third one, we control also for urbanization rate. Because population density and urbanization rate could have been influenced by agricultural productivity itself, which can in turn also be reflected in contemporary restraint. Now, we see that the main variables of interest here which is crop yield and crop yield change, are significantly different from zero. The effect is positive and significant, which means that one standard deviation increase in the historical parental crop yield brings, not parental, in the historical crop yield is related to a 7 points increase in the contemporary restraint. Just remember that the restraint is between 0 and 100 as an indicator, okay? And similar effect, a bit higher for the crop yield change from 16th century on. And here we control also for the crop growth cycle, as following Galore and his main model. Okay, now, the idea here is that this live control component, which is the predicted value from our first equation at the country level, should reflect somehow the importance that, of course, the intensity of norms today, but also the importance that individuals in that society, on average, attach to norms and restrictions in general. How important is a proper behavior in a society, to follow the rules, to be, and so. So just a very brief check. Here, I use the data from the European Social Survey, in which we have questions, the opinions of individuals related to this kind of behavioral patterns, let's say. So the first two is how important is the leisure for you. And the last four is how important for you is to behave properly, how important are traditions for the social life in general and for the identity of an individual, the rights for sexual minorities should be enforced or not, how important it is to live in a safe environment. So if this is of course at the individual level. So if we regress the individual self-declares opinion regarding these dimensions on the full set of regressors at the individual level, controls at the country level, and so on and so forth, and on predicted life control component and residual life control component, which should be related to more to leisure and fun, we see that the predicted life control significantly influences the opinions about rules and norms in the society, but not leisure. Why the residual component influences only leisure and not the importance of proper behavior and so on and so forth. Okay. Here, in this figure here, we can see, this is the second hypothesis, so the relationship between the life control component and self-declared loneliness. So to each individual, we attached the predicted life control component to their mothers and to their fathers, okay, according to the parental country of origin. The dependent variable is loneliness measured by UCLA scale, and we control for the full set of covariates here. What we can see is that only the mother's predicted life control component is important, and it is significantly related to a higher probability of experiencing loneliness, while the father's one is not, or only marginally significant in some in one model. Individualism, which is a proxy for quantity, is not statistically different from zero, the fact. So what counts is this, it seems that these life control components strongly can predict the probability of loneliness. If we do the same thing with the raw restraint index, we see that it works. So, but the magnitude is much lower because it contains also this residual component, right? And regressing, doing the same exercise by using directly Galore and Ozak measures shows that historical crop yield is significantly related to the probability of loneliness, but we decide not to use directly these measures because they're strictly related to other preference dimensions, like especially long-term orientation and to some extent trust. So we follow this strategy that I showed you before. Okay, and here we arrive to the main results of the two-stage estimation, in which individual health outcomes are regressed on the predicted loneliness from the first stage. We can see that the statistics from the first stage are satisfactory. It seems a really good instrument in this context. What can we see here is that loneliness appears to affect significantly only EuroD scale, which is the measure for emotional disorders, and body mass index. Marginally mobility limitations, but this is not robust. Mobility is not robust. The only robust effect of loneliness among all possible sensitivity checks is with EuroD scale, so emotional disorders, and the body mass index. And this is very interesting, especially this economically significant effect of the body mass index, which may also represent a potential channel for indirect effects of loneliness on other physical health outcomes. As for the EuroD scale, the effect on emotional disorders, this effect is mainly driven by depression and by suicidal thoughts and feelings of guilt to a lesser extent. Okay, so we do not find any significant effect of the number of chronic diseases and the self-assessed health in general. So what counts is the body mass index and the depression, and this holds true even when we control for unhealthy behavior and all the other behavioral aspects of individuals. Okay, these are the main results, and then we perform several other tests and models estimations. We also find that being lonely increases the probability of stomach pain and inflammation, and this is in line with the literature. But we do not find any effect of cognitive function or cognitive decline, a direct effect. And then, as I said before, there may be some additional channel, indirect channel, linking loneliness and other physical health outcomes that in our analysis do not result significantly different from zero, like diabetes, high blood cholesterol, and so on and so forth. But indirectly, there may be an effect, and this should be explored further. Among the sensitivity checks that we performed, we considered the frequency of parent-offspring interaction, so how frequently the individuals see or talk with their close relatives, whether they engage or not in voluntary or charity work, how often they socialize with others, the availability of friends in times of need, and whether they suffered from loneliness in childhood. All these controls and additional models do not alter the main results on EuroD scale and BMI. Everything remains very robust. So here, what we can conclude from this analysis is that it seems that there are some historical mechanisms that drove the emergence and persistence of norms and restrictions across generations, which are reflected by the contemporary cultures and that can be exploited as one of the potential drivers of attitudes towards loneliness today. And this is in line with the literature that says that quality, which is strongly influenced by norms and prohibitions, affects loneliness much more than quantity. Differently from the existing literature, which is very often quite, brings it's a bit messy in the sense that they find a lot of effects and everything seems significant. We find a different thing, that loneliness is important only for some things, for BMI and for emotional disorders. What else should be done? Many things. I think, first of all, we should also consider more seriously the problem of loneliness among younger individuals and how this affects not only health, but also other dimensions of social behaviors like social media abuse or things like this, or civic engagement in general. Yes, more or less this. And I think that the research on these arguments will continue because it is becoming an increasingly interesting argument. If you are interested, you can go to see what we did within the big project on loneliness in the European Union on this site, on this link. So thank you very much for your attention. I hope that I was not boring and that I tried at least in part to convince you about my story.
Thank you very much, Matija. Any questions?
Oh, we are perfectly in time.
Yeah, very good timing, actually. I think Almas. Almas?
Yeah, thank you for a very interesting presentation. I have a question. I don't know how relevant it is, but you started with social interaction and subjective self-assessment of loneliness. Can one use like inverse of family size as an objective measure of loneliness? The inverse of the family size.
This is very interesting, and of course it makes sense but it is quite in line with the distinction between individualistic and collectivistic societies, because in individualistic societies, the predominant family type is nuclear family. These are smaller families, right? In collectivist societies, they're on average characterized by bigger families, which are more communitarian families, in which at the same time, the role of proper behavior and norms and rules is much more important than in individualistic societies. So up to some extent, these two things are measured. If I understand well, you were proposing to use the inverse of the individual specific family size to,
yes.
Yeah, that would be really interesting. Yeah, that's a really good idea.
Thank you.
It would reflect up to some extent. Do you agree that the average characteristics of the society in which the individual live, right? Or maybe if they have a different background, they will have a different preference for family type also. This is definitely interesting. Thank you very much for this point.
Thank you.
Klaus?
Yeah, I have a more general question where I would like to get your insight. Well, you are in line with this many studies now going back to the literature you were citing, among others, that historical mechanisms play a role. Now, basically, well, there is a lot of reasons to believe that this could happen. On the other hand, the question is, if you go back very long, and if people have moved across the world quite a lot, then the question is, how much is really left from that? Would you not have to look into the genetic factors, so to speak? So people, that these genetic tests checking where are you from? Yes. Is this basically a problem, or just say if it doesn't work, it should not be significant, it should not be helpful? Is it what you are saying? But so many things historically have happened, so many things, yes, which may have affected wars and all kinds of stuff. And so now we are tracing things back to some things and ignore many other things, which might be correlated to some extent. How strong can we believe in all this wonderful literature, which I like to read, so to speak? Yes.
No, I agree completely. But for instance, now when you mentioned migrations and movements of people, which is a continuous process in the last centuries, of course. It started also in the 15th and 16th century, especially after the expansion of these crops and everything else. Galore and Ozak, they adjust, for instance, the agriculture measures for these migration patterns, right? And then they also use these adjusted. But this, of course, does not solve completely the issue that you mentioned. So there may be also some other piece of the phenomenon due to subsequent migrations of people. But I don't know if how we can control for that. I should definitely think about this. What was your idea in principle about this genetic? If you can
Well,
They
if
did
you
not
would have
have-
genetic data from in the survey, yes, you could
No, we
you could
don't.
test people. You don't have it, of course. I
No.
don't claim. I mean, I'm not asking you to do it, but in principle, nowadays you can find out what are the genetic factors of people, and you can say, well, even if you, I once met a black American who was driving me to the airport in Washington. He said, everybody tells me I'm so to speak, I have a tradition, African tradition, but no, I'm from Spain, he said. He's from Spain. So, because he has made a test. So yeah, and it was nice to chat with him, so to speak. And so the obvious factors we are seeing are often not the real factors behind the genetic factors and the experiences you drive with you, yes.
I think that this is an excellent idea for a pilot project that we can propose to the Commission, right? Because there are ways to arrive to the genetic heritage of people. There are now these analyses that also a private can do in order to know what is his or her genetic composition, definitely. But this is definitely interesting. But unfortunately, in general, we do not have this data, this information at the individual level. So, but it would be really interesting, yes.
Okay, any other questions? Going once, going twice. Okay, perfect time to stop as well. Thank you very much, Matija, again, for a very good presentation and great paper. And whenever it's ready, we would love to have it as a discussion paper, GLO discussion paper.
Okay.
So please send
Thanks
that.
a lot.
So thank you very much. And
thank you very much.